Church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's a pleasure to be with you. Christmas week, the week of, and we're going to do something a little different today. It's not Christmas Eve, but we got a little fireside thing going here, and I'm going to tell you some stories, read you some stories, some heartwarming stories of Christmas that I came across over the last couple of weeks, and I thought it'd be great to share with you. It'd be something different, not do a regular message type thing, but just give you some things that remind us that the spirit of Christmas lives on all the time. That spirit of love and giving and putting others first should be in our hearts all the time, not just at this time of the year. So some heartwarming Christmas stories for you to start off your Christmas week. So let's get started. It's just a small white envelope stuck among the branches of our Christmas tree. No name, no identification, no inscription. It has peeked through the branches of our tree for the past 10 years or so. It all began because my husband Mike hated Christmas. Oh, not the true meaning of Christmas, but the commercial aspects of it. Overspending, the frantic running around at the last minute to get a tie for Uncle Harry, and the dusting powder for Grandma. The gifts given in desperation because you couldn't think of anything else. Knowing he felt this way, I decided one year to bypass all the usual shirts and sweaters, ties, and so forth, and I reached for something special just for Mike. The inspiration came in an unusual way. Our son Kevin, who was 12 that year, was wrestling at the junior level at the school he attended. And shortly before Christmas, there was a non-league match against a team sponsored by an inner-city church. These youngsters, dressed in sneakers so ragged that shoestrings seemed to be the only thing holding them together, presented a sharp contrast to our boys in their spiffy blue and gold uniforms and sparkling new wrestling shoes. As the match began, I was alarmed to see that the other team was wrestling without headgear, a kind of light helmet designed to protect a wrestler's ears. It was a luxury the ragtag team obviously could not afford. Well, we ended up walloping them. We took every single weight class, and as each of their boys got up from the mat, he swaggered around in his tatters with false bravado, a kind of street pride that couldn't acknowledge defeat. Mike, seated beside me, shook his head sadly. I wish just one of them could have won, he said. They have a lot of potential, but losing like this could take the heart right out of them. Mike loved kids, all kids, and he knew them, having coached Little League football, baseball, and lacrosse. That's when the idea for the present came. That afternoon, I went to a local sporting goods store and bought an assortment of wrestling headgear and shoes and sent them anonymously to the inner city church. On Christmas Eve, I placed the envelope on the tree, the note inside telling Mike what I had done and that this was his gift from me. His smile was the brightest thing about Christmas that year and in succeeding years. For each Christmas, I followed the tradition. One year, sending a group of mentally handicapped youngsters to a hockey game. Another year, a check to a pair of elderly brothers whose home had burned to the ground the week before Christmas. And on and on. The envelope became the highlight of our Christmas. It was always the last thing opened on Christmas morning, and our children, ignoring their new toys, would stand with wide-eyed anticipation as their dad lifted the envelope from the tree to reveal its contents. As the children grew, the toys gave way to more practical presents, but the envelope never lost its allure. But the story doesn't end there. You see, we lost Mike last year due to cancer. When Christmas rolled around, I was still so wrapped up in grief, I barely got the tree up. But Christmas Eve found me placing an envelope on the tree. And in the morning, it was joined by 3 more. Each of our children, unbeknownst to the others, have placed an envelope on the tree for their dad. The tradition has grown, and someday will expand even further with our grandchildren standing to take down the envelope. Mike's spirit, like the Christmas spirit, will always be with us. 3 years ago, a little boy and his grandmother came to see Santa at Mayfair Mall in Wisconsin. The child climbed up on his lap, holding the picture of a little girl. "Who is this?" asked Santa, smiling. "Your friend? Your sister?" "Yes, Santa," he replied. "My sister Sarah, who is very sick," he said sadly. Santa glanced over at the grandmother who was waiting nearby and saw her dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "She wanted to come see you. Oh, so very much, Santa," the child exclaimed. "She misses you," he added softly. Santa tried to be cheerful and encouraged a smile to the boy's face, asking him what he wanted Santa to bring him for Christmas. When they finished their visit, the grandmother came over to help the child off his lap and started to say something to Santa, but halted. "What is it?" Santa asked warmly. "Well, I know it's really too much to ask of you, Santa, but..." The old woman began, shooing her grandson over to one of Santa's elves to collect a little gift, which Santa gave all his young visitors. "The girl in the photograph, my grandmother. Well, you see, she has leukemia and isn't expected to make it through the holidays," she said through tear-filled eyes. "Is there any way, Santa, any possible way that you could come see Sarah? That's all she's asked for Christmas, is to see Santa." Santa blinked and swallowed hard and told the woman to leave the information with his elves as to where Sarah was, and he would see what he could do. Santa thought of little else the rest of the afternoon, and he knew what he had to do. "What if it were my child lying in that bed dying?" he thought with a sinking heart. "This is the least I can do." When Santa finished visiting with all the boys and girls that evening, he retrieved from his helper the name of the hospital where Sarah was staying. He asked the assistant location manager how to get to Children's Hospital. "Why?" Rick asked with a puzzled look on his face. Santa relayed to him the conversation with Sarah's grandmother earlier that day. "Come on, I'll take you there," Rick said softly. Rick drove them to the hospital and came inside with Santa. They found out which room Sarah was in, and a pale Rick said he would wait outside in the hall. Santa quietly peeked into the room through the half-closed door and saw little Sarah on the bed. The room was full of what appeared to be her family. There was the grandmother and the girl's brother he had met earlier that day. A woman, whom he guessed was Sarah's mother, stood by the bed, gently pushing Sarah's thin hair from her forehead. And another woman, who he discovered later was Sarah's aunt, sat in a chair near the bed with a weary, sad look on her face. They were talking quietly, and Santa could sense the warmth and closeness of the family and their love and concern for Sarah. Taking a deep breath and forcing a smile on his face, Santa entered the room, bellowing a hearty, "Ho, ho, ho!" "Santa!" shrieked little Sarah weakly as she tried to escape her bed to run to him, IV tubes intact. Santa rushed to her side and gave her a warm hug. A child, the tender age of his own son, 9 years old, gazed up at him with wonder and excitement. Her skin was pale, and her short tresses bore telltale bald patches from the effects of the chemotherapy. But all he saw when he looked at her was a pair of huge blue eyes. His heart melted, and he had to force himself to choke back tears. Though his eyes were riveted upon Sarah's face, he could hear the gasps and quiet sobbing of the women in the room. As he and Sarah began talking, The family crept quietly to the bedside one by one, squeezing Santa's shoulder or his hand gratefully, whispering, "Thank you," as they gazed sincerely at him with shining eyes. Santa and Sarah talked, and she told him excitedly all the toys she wanted for Christmas, assuring him she'd been a very good girl that year. As their time together dwindled, Santa felt led in his spirit to pray for Sarah and ask permission from the girl's mother. She nodded in agreement, and the entire family circled around Sarah's bed, holding hands. Santa looked intensely at Sarah and asked her if she believed in angels. "Oh, yes, Santa, I do," she exclaimed. "Well, I'm going to ask that angels watch over you," he said. And laying one hand on the child's head, Santa closed his eyes and prayed. He asked that God touch little Sarah and heal her body from this disease. He asked that angels minister to her, watch, and keep her. And when he finished praying, still with eyes closed, he started singing softly, "Silent night, holy night." And the family joined in, still holding hands, smiling at Sarah and crying tears of hope, tears of joy for this moment, as Sarah beamed at them all. When the song ended, Santa sat on the edge of the bed again and held Sarah's frail small hands in his own. "Now, Sarah," he said Now, Sarah, he said authoritatively, "you have a job to do, and that is to concentrate on getting well. I want you to have fun playing with your friends this summer, and I expect to see you at my house at Mayfair Mall this time next year." He knew it was risky proclaiming that to this little girl who had terminal cancer, but he had to. He had to give her the greatest gift he could, not dolls or games or toys, but the gift of hope. "Yes, Santa," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes bright. He leaned down and kissed her on the forehead and left the room. Out in the hall, the minute Santa's eyes met Rick's, a look passed between them, and they wept unashamed. Sarah's mother and grandmother slipped out of the room quickly and rushed to Santa's side to thank him. "My only child is the same age as Sarah," he explained quietly. "This is the least I could do." They nodded with understanding and hugged him. 1 year later, Santa Mark was again back on the set in Milwaukee for his 6-week seasonal job, which he so loves to do. Several weeks went by, and then one day, a child came up to sit on his lap. "Hi, Santa. Remember me?" "Of course I do," Santa proclaimed, as he always does, smiling down at her. After all, the secret to being a good Santa is always to make each child feel as if they are the only child in the world at that moment. "You came to see me in the hospital last year." Santa's jaw dropped. Tears immediately sprang to his eyes, and he grabbed this little miracle and held her to his chest. "Sarah!" he exclaimed. He scarcely recognized her, for her hair was long and silky, her cheeks were rosy, much different than the little girl he visited in the hospital the year before. He looked over and saw Sarah's mother and grandmother in the sidelines, smiling and waving and wiping their eyes. It was the best Christmas ever for Santa Claus. He had witnessed and been blessed to be instrumental in bringing about this miracle of hope. This precious little child was healed, cancer-free, alive, and well. He silently looked up to heaven and humbly whispered, "Thank you, Father. 'Tis a very Merry Christmas." Paul never had much compassion for the lazy or those who squandered their means and then never had enough for the necessities. But for those who were genuinely in need, his heart was as big as all outdoors. It was from him that I learned the greatest joy in life comes from giving, not receiving. It was Christmas Eve, 1881. I was 15 years old and feeling that the world had caved in on me because there just hadn't been enough money to buy me the rifle that I wanted for Christmas. We did the chores early that night for some reason. I just figured Pa wanted a little extra time so we could read in the Bible. After supper was over, I took my boots off and stretched out in front of the fireplace and waited for Pa to get down the old Bible. I was still feeling sorry for myself, and to be honest, I wasn't in much of a mood to read scriptures. But Pa didn't get the Bible. Instead, he bundled up again and went outside. Couldn't figure it out because we had already done all the chores. I didn't worry about it long enough, though. I was too busy wallowing in self-pity. Soon, Pa came back in. It was a cold, clear night out, and there was ice in his beard. "Come on, Matt," he said. "Bundle up good. It's cold out tonight." I was really upset then. Not only wasn't I getting the rifle for Christmas, now Pa was dragging me out in the cold for no earthly reason that I could see. We'd already done all the chores, and I couldn't think of anything else that needed doing, especially not on a night like this. But I knew Pa was not very patient at one dragging one's feet when he told them to do something, so I got up, put my boots back on, got my cap, coat, and mittens. Ma gave me a mysterious smile as I opened the door to leave the house. Something was up, but I didn't know what. Outside, I became even more dismayed. There in front of the house was the work team, already hitched to the big sled. Whatever it was we were going to do wasn't going to be a short, quick little job. I could tell. We never hitched up this sled unless we were going to haul a big load. Paul was already up on the seat, reins in hand. I reluctantly climbed up beside him. The cold was already biting at me. I wasn't happy. When I was on, Paul pulled the sled around the house and stopped in front of the woodshed. He got off, and I followed. "I think we'll put on the high sideboards," he said. "Here, help me." The high sideboards. It had been a bigger job than I wanted to do with just the low sideboards on. But whatever it is we were going to do would be a lot bigger with the high sideboards on. After we had exchanged the sideboards, Paul went into the woodshed and came out with an armload of wood. The wood I'd spent all summer hauling down from the mountain, and then all fall sawing into blocks and splitting. What was he doing? Finally, I said something. "Paul," I asked, "what are you doing?" "You've been by the widow Jensen's lately?" he asked. The widow Jensen lived about 2 miles down the road. Her husband had died a year or so before and left her with 3 children, the oldest being 8. Sure, I'd been by, but so what? "Yeah," I said, "why?" "I rode by just today," Pa said. "Little Jakey was out digging around in the woodpile trying to find a few chips. They're out of wood, Matt." That was all he said, and then he turned and went back into the woodshed for another armload of wood. I followed him. We loaded the sled so high that I began to wonder if the horses would be able to pull it. Finally, Pa called a halt to our loading. Then we went to the smokehouse, and Pa took down a big ham and a side of bacon. He handed them to me and told me to put them in the sled and wait. When he returned, he was carrying a sack of flour over his right shoulder and a smaller sack of something else in his left hand. "What's in the little sack?" I asked. "Shoes. They're out of shoes." Little Jakey just had gunny sacks wrapped around his feet when he was out at the woodpile this morning. I got the children a little candy too. Just wouldn't be Christmas without a little candy. We rode the 2 miles to Widow Jensen's pretty much in silence. I tried to think through what Pa was doing. We didn't have much by worldly standards. Of course, we did have a big woodpile, though most of what was left now was still in the form of logs that I would have to saw into blocks and split before we could use it. We also had meat and flour, so we could spare that. But I knew we didn't have much money. So why was Pa buying them shoes and candy? Really, why was he doing any of this? Widow Jensen had closer neighbors than us. It shouldn't have been our concern. We came in from the Blythe side of the Jensen house and unloaded the wood as quietly as possible. Then we took the meat and flour to the door, and we knocked. The door opened a crack, and a timid voice said, "Who is it?" "Lucas Miles, ma'am, and my son Matt. Could we come in for a bit?" Widow Jensen opened the door and let us in. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The children were wrapped in another and were sitting in front of the fireplace by a very small fire that hardly gave off any heat at all. Widow Jensen fumbled with a match and finally lit the lamp. "We brought you a few things, ma'am," Pa said, and set the sack of flour down on the floor. I put the meat on the table. Then Pa handed her the sack with the shoes in it. She opened it hesitantly and took the shoes out, one pair at a time. There was a pair for her and one for each of the children. Sturdy shoes, the best. Shoes that would last. I watched her carefully. She bit her lower lip to keep it from trembling, and then tears filled her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She looked up at Pa like she wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. "We brought a load of wood too, ma'am," Pa said. He turned to me and said, "Matt, go bring in enough to last a while. Let's get that fire up to size and heat this place up." I wasn't the same person when I went back out to bring in the wood. I had a big lump in my throat, and as much as I hate to admit it, there were tears in my eyes too. In my mind, I kept seeing those 3 kids huddled around the fireplace and their mother standing there with tears running down her cheeks, with so much gratitude in her heart that she couldn't speak. My heart swelled within me, and a joy that I'd never known before filled my soul. I had given at Christmas many times before, but never when it had made so much of a difference. I could see we were literally saving the lives of those people. I soon had the fire blazing and everyone's spirits soared. The kids started giggling when Pa handed them each a piece of candy, and Widow Jensen looked on with a smile that probably hadn't crossed her face in a long time. She finally turned to us. "God bless you," she said. "I know the Lord has sent you. The children and I have been praying that he would send one of his angels to spare us." In spite of myself, the lump returned to my throat, and the tears welled up in my eyes again. I never thought of Pa in those exact terms before, but after Widow Jensen mentioned it, I could see that it was probably true. I was sure that a better man than Pa had never walked the earth. I started remembering all the times that he had gone out of his way for Ma and me and many others. The list seemed endless as I thought on it. Pa insisted that everyone try the shoes on before we left. I was amazed when they all fit, and I wondered how he knew what sizes to get. Then I guessed that if he was on an errand for the Lord, that the Lord would make sure he got the right sizes. Tears were running down Widow Jensen's face again when we stood up to leave. Pa took each of the kids in his big arms and gave them a big hug. They clung to him and didn't want us to go. I could see that they missed their Pa, and I was glad that I still had mine. At the door, Pa turned to the widow Jensen and said, "The missus wanted me to invite you and the children over for Christmas dinner tomorrow. The turkey will be more than the three of us can eat, and a man can get cantankerous if he has to eat too much turkey for too many meals. We'll be by to get you about 11. It'll be nice to have some little ones around again. Matt here hasn't been little for quite a spell." I was the youngest. My 2 brothers and 2 sisters had all married and moved away. Widow Jensen nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Miles. I don't have to say, may the Lord bless you, for I know certainly that he will." Out on the sled, I felt a warmth that came from deep within, and I didn't even notice the cold. We had gone a ways, and Pa turned to me and said, "Matt, I want you to know something. Your Ma and me have been tucking away a little money here and there all year so we could buy that rifle for you. But we didn't have quite enough. Then yesterday, a man who owed me a little money from years back came to make things square. Your Ma and me were real excited, thinking that now we could get you that rifle. And I started into town this morning to do just that. But on the way, I saw little Jakey out scratching the woodpile with his feet wrapped in those gunny sacks, and I knew what I had to do. Son, I spent the money for shoes and a little candy for those children. I hope you understand." I understood, and my eyes became wet with tears again. I understood very well, and I was so glad Pa had done it. Now the rifle seemed very low on my list of priorities. Pa had given me a lot more. He had given me the look on Widow Jensen's face and the radiant smiles of her 3 children. For the rest of my life, whenever I saw any of the Jensens or split a block of wood, I remembered. And remembering brought back the same joy I felt riding home beside Pa that night. Pa had given me much more than that rifle that night. He had given me the best Christmas of my life.